So I have talked about the certain requirements for which actually it is needed that how the particular recorder should how the particular process should be known. That is pretty important to understand. Now let's go ahead one by one exactly how this whole process of doing the fundamental basic market research should follow up. So we should start with an objective. What is my objective to identify? And there could be objective could be one, there could be multiple objectives which you can think of. That means in one particular research you want to identify the potential market, the customer need. So, or you can break down the objective into certain parts, and you can go for different research, smaller research. So that completely depends whether you want to keep a one line objective or you want to keep multiple objectives. Then you have to decide whether I'm going to go for entire population to do a survey. And when I say population of the potential market size. So that is exactly initially is supposed to be launched and supposed to be identified. Perhaps I don't know, probably you are distributing the holiday coupons to people in a particular office, and you want to understand before buying these holiday coupons from an agency, you want to identify that whether this particular product will be acceptable in the particular office or not. So in that particular case, how you are going to go ahead with it. You are going to do a census survey. If this office only contains 20 odd people, then you will do a simple census survey and you will identify whether this product will be sellable in the particular office or not. And that will give you a clear idea that in similar kind of setups whether these coupons can be sellable or not. And if the market size is literally large, then definitely you have to go for a sample survey. And sample surveys are more effective, much crisp, much administratively convenient. Then you start going for collecting the data. Then you start putting the data into certain software. So I would recommend for the fundamentals, Excel is more than sufficient. You don't need any software. And R is an pretty much sellable open source these days, and people are using it a lot. So you can use R also. So a fundamental knowledge of R will do enough to analyze the data in fundamental way. And then depending on the analysis of data, you just need to understand what are the correction that the particular product or idea is requiring. And then after that you need to make a decision. So this is exactly a rough, or I would say a fundamental flow, that how this whole market analysis is supposed to be captured throughout. But I know, what I am trying to cover is that look, research methodology is a technical subject, and there are a lot of do's and don'ts, and lot of processes, lot of designs are there. So, but if I talk about the fundamental, then this should be more than sufficient. So I am not asking that. I'm not saying that research is typically this kind of process. No, not at all. I'm saying what are the fundamentals that are required, because research is a far subject in depth. It requires a lot of technicalities, and you cannot expect a student who is becoming an entrepreneur, or probably a person, a faculty who is becoming an entrepreneur, to understand the entire research methodology in certain period of time and actually do as per the research methodology everything. So this is a fundamental sketch of what exactly how the process should be followed. uh, Certain examples of objective, it could be acceptability of the product which you want to know. You want to understand the market potential or the product design, whether it is acceptable or not. What is the competitor analysis, project design, price determination, financial planning, or some other objectives. There could be multiple objectives, there could be single objective, completely depends exactly where you want to pick it up. And some of these topics can be covered easily by secondary research. You don't have to go for a primary data or something. And for some, you definitely have to go for a primary data collection, like competitors analysis. That can be clearly done through secondary data if you want to. That means one or two fundamental questions about competitors can be asked in your primary data, and secondary data can give you a lot of idea about market capitalization and everything else. So this is exactly how this thing is about. uh, all right. I'm just going to skip this. Everybody knows it, the difference between census and sample survey. Quoted one example also. So I think these recorded videos will be available, so you can easily pause the video right here and you can understand what is the difference between sample and census survey. So I'll be skimming through these particular certain slides. What are the different merits of census survey and where exactly it helps you out. Certain demerits of census survey, of course, I'll be discussing. And then of course certain sample investigation things. So I'm going to stay for on a slide for a couple of seconds or something, so you can pause the video if you want to go for it. And I think more or less this is pretty important, that what are the three objectives of sample investigation. So sample can be used to estimate the parameter of the population. That is one thing which I am talking. Sample can be used to test the hypothesis, the assumption about the particular market, and sample could be used to manage the statistical quality control. So there are three certain objectives of sampling. So there is a difference between estimation and assumption, right? So as an estimation is something when you're completely dark about a particular idea or something, and you try to estimate what is going to happen. And if you already have a preconceived idea, you have an assumption in your mind about the market, and you try to test whether your assumption is right or not. So that comes under hypothesis testing. So it is supposed to be pretty clear in your mind that what exactly you are going to go for, whether you are going to go for estimation, because the statistics is completely different in that case. Whether you are going to go for hypothesis testing, then the stats is going to be different. And quality control is actually another part which comes under operations and all, R charts and P charts. So these three objectives of sampling are there, which any investigator must know. Merits, demerits, again, this more or less everybody has a pretty much idea about these things. People also know about what are the different shortcomings of sampling. So these things I'm just putting it comparison. So these are for your own reading. You can go through these particular things and you can choose whether I need to go for a sample survey or census survey. Census survey definitely involves a really large cost, a huge cost. So the last point, which is cutting half in the slide, probably is the administration, which is pretty difficult in sampling and pretty difficult in census and pretty easy in sampling. Certain requisites. So I'll just ponder upon the first point. The sample is supposed to be really good representative. That is the most important part of the particular population. The sample is not really good representative, then there lies a lot of problem. Then the study is not going to be giving you the result which are required properly. So representativeness and adequacy are two most important parts to which you need to understand in a bigger way. That means sample is supposed to be adequate in size, and sample is supposed to be representative of the population. To identify these two things, adequacy can be statistically calculated easily by using certain formulas, but representativeness is supposed to be catering to this particular chart itself. That means that slide gives you a fair bit of idea that how the sampling should be done, how the sampling is done actually. So you can collect a random sample, you can collect a non-random sample, and that is a matter of choice depending on the type of study which you are doing. Most of the studies are happening with non-random sampling these days, and you also know that. Now when I talk about the random sampling, there are two ways I can do that. I can go for a restricted random sampling. That means by involving some bylaws on random sampling, and unrestricted random is when the things are completely non means random in nature. That means everybody has an equal chance of being selected. That is the typical mathematical definition of uh, random sampling. Unrestricted random sampling, when everybody has an equal chance of being selected. But in restricted, we put some restrictions. At the end, the probability remains same. That means probability of selection for everyone remains same at the end. But in the beginning, the probability changes a bit. So one is stratified sampling. So I'll just start giving you a little brief about the things. Stratified is pretty simple. All of you understand, creating, homogeneous groups out of heterogeneous population. So if the population is of highly heterogeneous state, so in that case, the homogeneous groups or stratas has to be formed, and those stratas must be practiced, must be utilized to pick up the sample. That is one part. And the second part is cluster sampling, little similar to stratified, but the clusters are geographical in nature. That means you create different geographical clusters in order to look into different samples which is to be picked. So this is a cluster sampling is one of the very important parts when it comes to pick up a representative sample. And stratified too. So cluster actually it covers more or less entire geographical area, and you clusterify it, and then you try to pick up the sample. Systematic, when you define a very simple rule in which you pick up the sample from, let us suppose it could be a possibility that every third unit is going to be a part of my sample, or every fourth unit is going to be a part of my sample. So it is again another process of sampling. Now, the third is the multi-stage. That means at times what you do is you do sampling in multiple stages. That means in multiple layers. So how do you do that kind of sampling is like in stage one you do cluster, and in stage two you go for stratified. So you involved multiple stages of sampling in there. So that is another part. And I think in the detail you can all understand this particular thing, that how these sampling processes can be picked up. So this chart is going to facilitate you to identify that what are the different ways and what are the fundamentals which are required in order to collect a sample. So this much, if you are training a student or probably a staff or a faculty to become an entrepreneur, this much he should know, that this is the basic framework of sampling, and he should know brief about these things and what are the do's and don'ts about these particular points. So my idea is that when you are developing entrepreneurs, and this must be taught. This must be given an idea to. Probably an hour course on sampling would do enough. So student is clear right on day one in his mind that what kind of sample size, sample process to be picked, and it's going to be convenient for him. And in non-random methods, we have judgment, quota, convenience, and snowball is one of the very as far as subject age is concerned, it is pretty new technique in nature. That means you just talk to one particular person, and then he gives two more references. Then you talk to another person, he gives you two more references, and that's how the ball keeps rolling. It's bigger and bigger. So that is another part of sampling. Judgment is all about taking your own judgment to pick up a sample. Most of the research studies are happening on the basis of judgment sampling, to be very honest, where a person makes a judgment about the sample, that these are the units which are going to be a part of my sample. Quota is certainly about allotting a particular you know portion to particular sample, that who's from which particular quota how much sample is supposed to be coming. And convenience is as per convenience. So most, and again, this is one of the very popular methods, convenience. In fact, most of the researchers do the convenience sampling. They pick up the data from their known ones, from their convenient ones. So, and then they do this particular study. So that is another particular part of the convenience sampling, and most of the people try to use the convenience sampling, which I don't say a very bad idea, until unless it is representing the proper population. Then it's a wonderful idea to go for a convenience sampling. It's not bad at all. So this is one of the most fundamental things which has to be given to an entrepreneur. He must know about sampling. He must understand sampling. He must understand the technicalities of sampling, the process of sampling. And this is another very fundamental thing which entrepreneur should understand, that what are the various ways he can get the data. So primary data, technically, if you go with the books and you try to dive deep into the data collection techniques, you will find different nomenclatures, more techniques, but fundamentally these 5 techniques, if somebody knows, are more than sufficient. Of course, the personal interview is one of the very known techniques of primary data. And in this particular technique, what exactly you do is you go to the source direct, you try to interview the source of data, and you collect the data through that particular thing. Well, indirect personal, this is more suitable when the geographical area of sample collection is pretty small and the sample size which you are collecting is very small. Then that goes conveniently, because if sample is large and you are going for personal interviews, then it'll require means a lot of time is required, a lot of funds are required, and it sometimes people get frustrated, irritated, and leave the studies in between. So that's a very careful method to be picked. So if your product is of very niche category where the sample is supposed to be very small, from which the data has to be collected, I think personal interview method is good. It could be structured, it could be unstructured. So it can be taught to a student how the PI should be taken, how to go for a structured PI or how to go for an unstructured PI. Then comes the indirect personal interview method. Whenever your product is of sensitive nature, then in that case, indirect personal interviews are more convenient. Probably it works more with the financial products in which the investment is there, and people want to invest their savings in, so they don't want to disclose very easily that how much savings they have and what is actually their bank value. So in that case, some indirect interviews techniques are required. Now, the most popular method is mail questionnaire method. Develop a questionnaire, float it through WhatsApp or anywhere using Google Forms, or probably a lot of another online portals are available like SurveyMonkey or valuedopinion.com. And you can go for OneDrive forms, you can go for Google Forms, and you design a form, you float the link, and the people fill the form. It comes back to you in Excel. This is one of the most popular method, the mail questionnaire. The second most popular method is, of course, information through schedule. When the people walk around with a schedule in their hand, get the responses collected in the physical format,